All right. Hi, everyone. We are working on plugging a judge for this round. We should have that finished hopefully shortly. I'll update everyone as you need it or as it comes through.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, we plugged the judge. We have the judge on their way, so the round should be getting off here shortly. Sorry for the delay.
Great, thank you very much.
Alrighty, it looks like everyone's here, so you all should be good to get started.
Hey, sorry, I got confused earlier. I thought we were speaking first for some reason. Do you guys mind sending out the doc to your side? I'll put my email and my partner Will as well. And if there are any judges that have left to do so.
Judges, would y'all like to be on this email chain as well?
No, thank you. At least for myself.
I have included my email, but I generally don't read what is sent.
I'm good as well. I actually have dyslexia, so it won't help much anyway.
Thank you. Well, we've just sent it to our opponents, so if that'll work.
If everyone is ready, then I can go ahead and start it up.
Yeah, we're
All good? Okay. Assuming everyone is ready. We negate, resolved, when in conflict, democracy should prioritize isolation over engagement when responding to human rights abuses by authoritarian regimes. Framework, net benefits. The team that proves that supporting their idea provides or yields the most benefits should win this round. Definitions, prioritize from Webster, to list or rate projects, goals, etc. in order of priority. Now on to contention 1. Diplomatic engagement is the only viable option. Diplomacy and engagement are the only way to move forward with Russia. Jenkins 22. Economic sanctions, the capitalist equivalent of medieval siege and famine. History shows no signs of sanctions achieving their desired aim. This is Putin's war, not Russia's. The justification for sanctioning its economy, banks, travel, sports teams, and cosmetology and dysphoria is that this will somehow persuade Putin of the error of his ways. Do we intend for Russians to suddenly do what they have not done for a century and rebel and topple him? To wait that long for Putin to die or fall off his perch? Mediation must find some form of words to cover his retreat, however painful those words may be to swallow. Ukraine and Russia must live as neighbors once more. The alternative is for Kiev to suffer years of occupation and puppet government until liberal voices within Russia persuade whoever occupies the Kremlin to relent. Those voices most desperately need just now. They will require not ostracism and hostility from the West, but contact, friendship, and encouragement. U.S. sanctions only hurt Russians. Aspor 22. Further isolating Russia and Putin from the international community also gives the Russian autocrat regime yet another opportunity to impose more repressive policies on its citizens and opposition parties. As the world rightfully fears for the Ukrainian people, we must not turn a blind eye to Russians who are also Putin's victims. Putin is creating a blueprint for genocide in Ukraine, Dickinson 22. In order to create the Russified Ukraine he dreams of, Putin will need to pacify or remove the vast majority of the population. Western leaders have reacted impressively to the shock of Putin's invasion, but they may not yet have grasped the true gravity of the situation. The risk of genocide in Ukraine is now very real. Putin has crossed almost every imaginable red line and turned his country overnight into an international pariah. He will pursue his criminal ambitions with an increasing recklessness that reflects his growing desperation. Contention 2. Sanctions enhance authoritarianism. Sanctioning authoritarian regimes pushes regimes towards larger authoritarian partners. This destroys global democracy. Press 20. Countries with weak authoritarian regimes. Leaders are increasingly looking to other powerful authoritarians for material support. Direct monetary transfer, preferential trade deals, and developmental projects can help regimes generate cash. Russia provided a vital lifeline to the Maduro regime by arranging for the state oil giant Rosneft to buy hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Venezuelan crude oil. Autocracy promoters have been very willing to provide each other, exporting everything from expertise to guns in an effort to bolster recipients' coercive capacities. Although autocracy promotion is becoming increasingly prevalent on the international scene, its rise is not unstoppable. If the United States is to strengthen its efforts to work against the expansion of authoritarianism abroad, it needs to target these weaknesses. Sanctions and isolation result in extreme poverty for citizens in those countries. Applebaum 21. This can devolve into what Popovic calls the Maduro model. Autocrats who adopt it are willing to enter economic collapse, isolation, and mass poverty if that's what it takes to stay in power. They assume that any money that the West doesn't give them will be replaced by China, Pakistan, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. And if the money doesn't come, so what? Their goal is not a flourishing, prosperous Afghanistan, but an Afghanistan where they are in charge. The widespread adoption of the Maduro's model helps explain why Western statements at the time of Kabul's fall sounded so pathetic. They are not concerned about the happiness or well-being of their fellow citizens, let alone the views of anyone else. Systemic violence is tremendously worse due to less accountability and visibility. That's Nixon 11. I don't have time. Vote calm.
Sending out a speech doc now. I think it's been sent to everyone. Just make sure. Let me know when everyone's good to go. All right, all judges good? Awesome. I'll begin on first word. Our first contention is arms sales. First on Saudi Arabia, the Yemen war is killing, displacing, and starving millions. Sommerland 18, quote, as many as 13 million people in Yemen are facing starvation under the constant threat of airstrikes. The battle is being fought between Houthi rebels and Saudi Arabia. Strict Saudi blockades and travel restrictions have prevented food and aid from reaching Yemen, leaving desperate families unable to afford basic supplies. But we destroy the Saudis' capacity to continue fighting. That forces them to negotiate. Harb 19, quote, ending assistance would curtail Riyadh's war efforts. U.S. support is crucial to Riyadh's military capabilities. If we suspend providing spare parts, the Air Force would be grounded in 2 weeks. They will go to the peace table and negotiate. U.S. role in the war remains extremely important logistically and politically. If the U.S. turns off the taps of the Saudis and Emirates, the pressure to end the war would be very hard to resist. Without American and British support, the air coalition would find it very hard to continue with this war. Second, Philippines. Duterte's war on drugs kills innocent civilians. Katwa 18, quote, since Duterte is president, the war on drugs is a violation of many human rights. Innocent civilians are victims of the war on drugs. 60,000 people went to prisons. Guards shoot suspects to death. The number of homicides in the Philippines was the 11th highest in the entire world. War on drugs kills tens of thousands so far. Aspinall 19, quote, drug war tactics could be responsible for as many as 27,000 extrajudicial killings. We solve. Arms sales fund the police and military forces. Action Network, quote, taxpayer funds are bankrolling and worsening human rights violations in the Philippines. Duterte's regime is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid in the East and Southeast Asia. U.S. government is complicit. There's no way to ensure U.S. military aid doesn't enable U.S. Human rights violations. U.S. equipment provides the backbone of Duterte's military modernization program. Duterte pledged to double the salaries of military and police. He can't do so without U.S. aid in arms. Link 2. Arms sales fund the weapon and tech. Miller Shoshani 6.3, quote, U.S. helped inaugurate Duterte's drug war by giving police $32 million for equipment and training and policing standards. Increased militarization and bombing there backed by U.S. drones, advisors, and special forces. Link 3. U.S. arms backed police surveillance systems. That's key to violations there. Chu 19, quote, U.S. military aid is only making internal conflicts worse. U.S. sold the Philippines police and surveillance equipment. This tremendous transfer of weapons and surveillance tech is significant in propping up the Philippines armed force capacity. It can't do so without U.S. aid. Without U.S. aid, the Philippine military would lack the airplanes and tech necessary to do surveillance. This integration of intelligence activity and counterterrorism is dangerous. It will worsen repression against anyone organizing indigenous labor or human rights. It feeds a growing bloodbath as paramilitaries are employed to undermine local struggles while providing cover for government troops to escape accountability. Impact 1, you stop current abuses by voting for us by stopping sending arms. It's a modern-day genocide. Singaman 17, quote, Duterte's war on drugs is a textbook case of what the process of genocide looks like. Duterte believes that drug suspects are not human. Duterte justifies his policy using rhetoric of hatred, fear, paranoia in order to deny accountability for the deaths from his war on drugs. Duterte's war on drugs satisfies the stage of genocide. Calling the mass murder of drug suspects in the Philippines a war on drug removes its human toll. Impact 2, Duterte's policies get modeled across Asia. You get democratic decline spilling outwards that multiplies the abuse. Coca 627, quote, in Asia, anti-drug rhetoric is gaining traction amongst leaders. First it was Southeast Asia, now South Asia is joining the trend. Bangladesh's prime minister launched a war on drugs. Sri Lanka decided to reintroduce the death penalty. The inspiration for both countries, the Philippines. Indonesia, which saw 2 rounds of drug executions followed by a stark rise in extrajudicial killings. State-sanctioned violence against drug criminals could be spreading to South Asia, where it would have a hugely detrimental impact on human rights and the rule of law. Now, war. First, weapons allow governments across the world to engage in war crimes and perpetuate bloody civil wars. Thrall Domini 18, quote, there are a large number of risky customers in the world, and the United States sells weapons to most of them. The 28 countries in active high-level conflicts bought an average of $3 billion worth of arms. These governments have used American weapons to promote oppression, commit human rights abuses, and perpetuate bloody civil war. Second, arms sales raise the likelihood of military success, leading recipient countries to engage in more conflict, being more oppressive. Thrall 18, quote, several academic studies' primary conclusion is that arms sales make conflict more likely. The increase in the recipient's military capabilities makes victory in a potential conflict more likely, raising the likelihood of disputes, raising demanding concessions, and escalating into conflict. Autocratic governments importing weapons use weapons to oppress their own citizens since they now have greater coercive ability. U.S. arms to Iraq preceded the emergence of Islamic State. Arms help Saudi Arabia and Yemen and enable Nigerian government to unleash more effective violence on its citizens. Thank you.
Yes. Mike's hot.
Okay. You ready for cross?
Yeah.
Cool. Can I get the first question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so your entire case is off the basis by stopping arms sales that leads to all of your other impacts.
That is definitionally AF-ground. Yes.
Okay, cool. That's all I needed.
So diplomacy in Russia, what does that actually look like?
So it's compromise, essentially. We have to make Russia look like the good guy, and also the United States needs to come out as the good guy. That's
not what I'm asking. What are you actually doing? What are you advocating for? What does diplomacy mean? Are you doing military intervention? What?
So diplomacy is peace talks. It's essentially trying to create not only a ceasefire, but just Russia pulling out of Ukraine. That is the end impact of our diplomacy.
Okay, cool. You want a question?
Yeah. So does ending selling arms change the mindset of a regime?
Even if the regime wants to do something, if you take away its literal capability to do so, we see our impacts. That's
Can I have a follow-up?
No. Can I have a question on Russia? Why do you think that Russia will want to go to the negotiating table right now, given that its current behavior is that it's doubling down when U.S. is engaging?
Because the United States is actually crippling Russia. Russia, at its current point, is having a hard time even pushing into the very corners of Ukraine. It has a hard time pushing into Ukraine whatsoever. So yeah, they are having to look for an out to be able to get out of this problem.
Take a question.
So when we end selling arms to any country, how does that stop them from not just going to another country to buy arms?
Because it's actually really difficult to fill in. Interoperability means that it's really difficult to change your weapon systems. We'll reach you more arguments on that later in the rebuttal. I'm not going to make them all now in CX, but basically it's extremely difficult and we still see our impacts. On Russia, do you think that Putin is acting rationally right now in the war in Ukraine in regards to his economy?
No, he's scrambling.
Okay, so if he's scrambling, then why is he going to act logically if the U.S. is crippling his economy?
Because
our response
now
is
we're not giving him a way out. He has two outs. He either has to go and completely take over Ukraine, which is just genocide, or he just loses. That's about it. So
all that presumes that he's acting rationally. How do we know that he's not just a crazy dictator bent on doing whatever he wants, as a lot of analysts say?
Because a regime has to stay in power, and that's what his main goal is. It doesn't matter if he loses the war. If he's in power, he's in power. That's it.
Sure.
So who is committing the abuse in the Philippines? It's the police, right?
Police, military, Duterte, the government as well. It's an authoritarian regime.
And the police aren't going anywhere in the Philippines, correct?
Sanctions and entrenching authoritarianism. There's only one card here actually arguing how it increases authoritarianism, or two, sorry, the Nixon, right? Less visibility. Do we have high visibility right now into North Korea, where we have any country? Do we have high visibility into Russia now? What country do we have high visibility into if it's authoritarian?
Are you talking about us being able to see if they are going to other alliances? Is that what you mean?
No. I thought that your Nixon 11 card was saying it's bad to have sanctions because then we have less visibility into what bad stuff is going on there.
No, absolutely not. We're pushing regimes to other regimes because they're losing their ability to supply themselves because the United States is supplying them.
Okay,
it's
cool.
the sanctions.
That's fine. That's fine.
Take 10 seconds or run prep time now.
We're going to take prep.
Oh, cease prep time in a minute and 7 seconds used. Low Valley Pro. Reply all. Attach.
Is there going to be a doc for this?
Yes, I'm putting it in right now. It's called Mo Valley, JKLMLP. What's that? It's called Mo Valley Pro. Battery. Just a thumbs up or verbal. I've got it from my opponents will do.
Have not gotten it yet. We'll let you know when I do.
As that happens, for everybody else, the order will go the cons case and then the pro case. We'll talk about their contention 1, contention 2, and then contention 3 is kind of just all in there as well. Let's actually make this a second. Super. Opponents, how you doing?
Just got it. Are you good, Bradley? All right, we're good.
Perfect. Let's get this show on the road. My name is Cuauhtemoc Olvera. I'm the second speaker for Missouri Valley. So first, in the con case, you're going to extend all of our contention 1 and contention 2. Our contention 1 talks about how we solve for Russia because Putin is desperate for a win, and it's only through diplomacy that we make him look like a winner while also getting him out of Ukraine. And our contention 2, which talks about sanctions pushing regimes towards other regimes, which increase global authoritarianism, which means more human rights abuses. This goes hand in hand with their contention 3 about war and the proliferation of arms cells, because if an authoritarian regime is selling the arms, then that means even more human rights abuses. Still on our case, what the opponents are going to do, they're going to get up and say that diplomacy causes some harms. That's not true, because in the initial parts of the invasion, diplomacy was the only thing that didn't escalate. Rose in Politics 22. Macron was the first leader of major Western powers to meet Vladimir Putin since Russia massed troops near Ukraine. His talks helped prevent the crisis from escalating. Compare that to sanctions, which escalated the war. And then they'll get up and say that diplomacy doesn't do anything. This is wrong, because we see this in Russia. Negotiations are working. Russia and Ukraine are close to an agreement on critical issues. Ray 22. Ukraine and Russia were nearing an agreement on critical issues, which could lead to a ceasefire soon. We're approaching on the positions of both sides on the important subject. We are hopeful for a ceasefire in the sides that do not take a step back from the current position. So even if we cannot end the war, we still see a decrease in human rights abuses in any war through diplomacy, because we create ceasefires and installments. We also see solvency within the Middle East. Engagement through diplomacy ends the conflict. Only we save lives. Al Ferrer 2019. Direct dialogue between regional actors launched negotiations that lead to stability. Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed that conflicts in Yemen can only be ended through political rather than military solutions. Moving to the pro case. So on their contention 1, Saudi Arabia, and also their contention 3, war. So they say that ending arms sales is key to stopping the impacts, right? Well, if that's true, then the war continues on, because Saudi Arabia can turn to allies in response to Western arms embargoes. Hello 2020. Saudi Arabia is prepared to move forward with weapon systems projects should Western embargoes limit those efforts. We signed more than 25 agreements, multiple opportunities to acquire alternative technologies. If the U.S. blocks us, we still have the opportunity for almost any of the products and weapon systems to get it localized through our partnerships. And number 2 is that defensive sales to Saudi Arabia are critical to maintaining alliances and checking Iranian expansion. Heinrich 21. Defensive and medium-range air-to-air missiles, the Saudis need them because they depleted their munitions in the ongoing war with Iran. Iran is the greatest cause of violence in the Middle East and has the ability to affect the availability and price of energy. Should the U.S. and Saudi Arabia lose control of the security shipping lanes, Iran and its bold partners would be greatly empowered to coerce the U.S. and our allies. If Iran succeeds in helping the Houthis take control of Yemen, it would gain control of one of the world's crucial oil choke points. The partnership between Gulf states and the U.S. is critical to counter Iran. We only provide defensive systems. And now here's another disadvantage to moving out of Saudi Arabia. This Saudi abandonment causes them to get nukes. This creates multiple scenarios for extinction. Bauman 8. If the protected states perceive a decline in the will of the U.S. to serve as the security guarantor, this creates the most intense incentive for a state to reassess its nuclear decision. In the eyes of countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran's nuclear program has heightened threat perceptions. These states appear to be moving in the direction of nuclear breakout capability. Moving on to their contention 2 about Philippines. They have no solvency because Duterte doesn't care about human rights. He's been violating them long before he was president of the Philippines. 2021. I don't care about human rights. These words uttered by Duterte's president in 2020 with the value of human rights. He was not engaging in hyperbole or just driven by the knee-jerk reaction to criticism of his record in human rights. Cut the card there. So basically what this means, it doesn't matter if they have guns or surveillance state. They don't care about human rights. They will go hand-to-hand combat with the civilians to oppress them. It doesn't matter if they have the means or not. They still don't care about human rights. Moving on, there's also a disadvantage to cutting off the Philippines. That would make it impossible to defend the South China Sea, and supply chains would be too long in Chinese missile defenses back to 2020. Without the Philippines, U.S. forces would be fighting from the much farther away. The closest military facilities to South China Sea are in Okinawa. Their path towards largely take them over open ocean. They would be moving through a sizable Chinese missile quiver. The Philippines and Indonesia also might deny U.S. forces access to airspace, making the route even more circuitous. So basically, what the impact here, cut all the cards there. The impact here is that China's power rises, which means China can now check the United States, creating a global superpower war. That's my time.
All right, taking running props running now.
Stop.
All right, I'm getting ready to send out the doc. Let me know when you got it. All right, it should be sent. Let me know when you get it. Also, for judges, by the way, my camera is not working, so unfortunately I can't be on camera. All right, cool. Give me 1 second. All right, is anyone not ready? Cool. For judges, the order is going to be AFNEG. Cool. Starting in, sorry, 1 second. Starting in 3, 2, 1. First off, they say that other actors can fill in. They can't. Kuwait 18 tells you that once a country is locked into a specific type of weapon system, the cost of which can be huge. Military personnel must be retrained, spare parts must be replaced, and operational changes may be necessary. The transition cost to buy from another country can be prohibitive, even for oil-rich Saudi Arabia. Armaments from Russia, China, or anywhere else are not as sophisticated as U.S. weapons, which is why you should cheaper. That means it's bad. Second, also inoperability. Spindle 719 tells you that more than 60% of U.S. arms come from Saudi. Saudi comes from U.S. It will be hostile for Saudi to transition to primarily a Chinese or Russian military. All means no inoperability. We solve. Second, China wants to keep a low profile. Zhang tells you that China would not increase trade with Saudi Arabia. China wants to keep low profile before seeing how it plays out, addressing it. They don't want to do it. Now, no Saudi pro-lift. The Limpman 08. A nuclear program would place Saudi Arabia in the category of global nuclear along with North Korea. The acquisition of warheads would encounter strenuous opposition from the U.S. The U.S. will be well aware that the U.S. law requires economic and military sanctions against nuclear proliferators. Economic confrontation and defiance are not Saudi Arabia style. Cut there. Now, second, also that means they don't pro-left. Now they try and say that like Iran goes in and that you're going to it's going to really be used bad because they're going to use oil to coerce other countries. That doesn't happen. Two reasons. First, Scott 18 tells you that renewable energy fills the void. It tells you 2018 thanks to economies of scale and technological improvements, while the global energy recovery and the associated strengthening of coal prices will make clean energy and electric eagles more competitive against their fossil fuel compartments. So no ability to coerce other countries because renewable energy solves. But second, also Stuart 18 tells you that their production was cut. U.S. has the ability to ramp up its production and would actually become more economically viable for U.S. producers, including fracturers, to do it as well. Also, they try and tell us to turn that the Philippines is going to be really important because you need to protect the South China Sea, and that is going to cause a great China war. But this is bad. Two responses to their defense. Jefferson 19 tells you that CCP is risk averse. Tells you that quote Chinese strategy will be used will seeks to avoid provoking conflict with the United States. China politics have been coupled to an effort to reassure and engage the United States as to avoid unneeded competition. China's leaders are aware of the risk of taking over the confrontational stance against a still potent United States. But then second, also not respond to it against. Art 10 tells you that China does not represent the type of security threat to the United States and Germany to Russia. The possession of nuclear weapons on both sides have been restraining effect on dramatically raising the cost of miscalculation, thereby increasing incentives not to miscalculate. No war. On to Ned. Contention with Russia. Remember, Ukraine is not an authoritarian regime, so even if it was engagement, it's reference to human rights violations. What it means is that even in our world, we could still get involved because it's a war. It's not human rights violation in terms of Ukraine, so we can still help Ukraine on both sides. Now, it's on and non-unique because Russia's moving back in the scope, which they also concede. Pelchik 15 tells you that Russia can't afford an invasion. Countries weaken the economy and the threat of further Western sanctions make an massive offensive less attractive. Russia appears no longer want to seize, annex, or occupy eastern parts of Ukraine. This means that they can't continue the fighting, but also look at their Jenkins evidence because they never actually show you that diplomacy actually solves. It just says sanctions aren't working. Force them to give you solvency. They never actually read any solvency evidence. They also concede in Crossfire that Ukraine is crippling Russia. They can move back now. But also, even if you wanted to engage in negotiations, different actors fail because interaction fails. Rakaya 94 tells you that material relief for diplomatic conventions with humanitarian goals are difficult to implement. They're rarely done particularly well because they fail because of incompetence or mixed motives by the UN or other representatives. So they fail. Also, again, it fails because Hole 19 tells you that negotiations fail. The quality of negotiations were all in law as partners to not visibly engage in meaningful trades. Cut all the aid stuff. Yeah, cool. Oh, also turn it though, because foreign pressures through negotiations improve domestic support. Hellmeyer 21. Foreign pressures facilitates autocrats to feel national sentiments and frame interventions. We think that this makes it much, much worse. Also, onto sanctions, on the contention too. All of our sanctions stuff turns. We also think that sanctions turn it though, because Halen 9 tells you that sanctions stuff turn future aggression. They tell you that the recent track record of applying sanctions gives reason to hope that they can achieve important results properly and proportionally framed. They can offer listed supplied allied support cases that point to recent sanctions regimes, including Iran, Russia, and North Korea. Sanctions in Iran help bring that country to the bargaining table. All of this solves all the evidence. So very proud. Vote AF.
Ready for cross? Oh,
Oh yeah, open for cross.
sweet. See, my first question for you is so on the nuclear proliferation, you say that Saudi Arabia fears sanctions, right? So if you're going to sanction them already, then what fear do they have of being sanctioned?
It also says they fear any backlash from US. They know this is going to be really bad. I also think there's a difference, there's a meaningful difference between stopping arms sales to the country and all-out economic sanctions. In a total all-out economic sanctions would bankrupt Saudi Arabia. Arms sales is a very specific, particular thing. It's a hell of a lot worse if Saudi were to get armed. All right, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Now, let's talk about, you never actually read it, like your card never actually says you solve like through diplomacy. If in the status quo, you say Russia's like being crippled by the US sanctions. So why does this get worse? Like they still haven't even taken Kiev and they're losing cities literally as we speak.
Right. So there's a couple of things here. Number one is that we do have solvency. We proved it in the Middle East through the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and then also in the war. So
Wait, Saudi Arabia and Iran are literally at war again in Yemen. So how did you solve?
Please let me-
Literally.
And also in Russia, even if we can't completely stop the war, it is through diplomacy that ceasefires happen. So if the war doesn't stop, only through diplomacy do we see a reduction in human rights abuses during that wartime. And also sanctions, they made mass poverty within Russia. So it was at the cost of mass poverty that sanctions are working. While through diplomacy, there's a way
This is a war right now, right?
it's an invasion
In Russia.
Sure, yeah, Russia. It's
Yeah, so this is about human rights violations. None of this resolution precludes us from getting involved in wars. It's specific to human rights violations. So why can't we just get involved in the war?
Right, because when you get involved in the war and you run tanks and start like
No, I'm saying we can do your diplomatic engagement because this is about a war, not HR violations.
Right, yeah. So genocide is a human rights violation. Going in and killing people, that's
but you said it yourself, it's a war. Armed conflict is not just straight like regular HR violations. So why, according to the topic and resolution, why can't we just do diplomatic engagements too? Like I tell you in my speech.
Wait, say that again?
Like this, okay, this topic is specific to human rights violations, but a war is a different thing. A war may include human rights violations, but the United States is still allowed to get involved in wars. So why can't we use diplomatic engagement on both sides, af and neg? Because it's a war, not just HR violations.
So already in your first statement, there's something wrong. Just because the resolution has the word human rights violations in it, that doesn't mean
the word. That's like what we're debating.
No, it's when regimes who enact human rights violations. That's the team.
Wait, so is it your position that if a war, like if something happens to NATO and that regime happens to commit human rights violations, the U.S. can't get involved under the AF?
Wait, say that again.
So if something happens in NATO and that regime happens to commit human rights violations, you think that the AF topically is not allowed to do diplomacy?
I don't think I understand your question, but if a regime is enacting human rights abuses, diplomatic engagement falls under our ground. So on your side, you don't get that.
That's fine. All right, thanks.
We're gonna take prep time starting. Stop now. Cease prep at a minute 50.
Well, I guess there's one card I'm gonna read. I guess I will send it
You
to
gonna
you
read
guys.
it? Oh. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. It's just called Sims Puff. So, wait. Oh, never mind. It's didn't send to the right thing. Okay, there we go. We'll talk about this first. So, just overview, everyone. I'm gonna go over like off the map, kind of, just talking about some like topicality stuff that just happened in CrossX with them, and then I'm gonna go over our case, contention 1, contention 2, and then
Quick
their
question.
case.
Oh,
Yeah.
Never mind. Sorry, I was. If you were sending something, I just got it. My bad.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, cool. Let's go over.
Wait 1 sec. I'm still opening it.
Gotcha.
Okay. Good to go whenever.
Cool. Starting now. So just to clarify, war is inherently human rights violations. That is genocide. You have to flow this in the round. Any impact from war leads to human rights violations. So that's why we talk about solving war. Now on to our case, diplomatic engagement, contention 1. They say that Russia is moving back to the status quo and that we can't continue fighting. This just simply isn't true. You have Russia's war in Ukraine has reached a stalemate. Monique 22. Analysts have predicted a stalemate across Ukraine nearly a month into Moscow's unprovoked invasion of the country. Russian forces are digging in and generally beginning to set conditions to hold their current forward positions for an indefinite time. Stalemate will likely be very violent and bloody. The status of condition in war in which each side conducts offensive operations that do not fundamentally alter the situation. Judges, in Ukraine and Russia, there is literally nothing that's going to happen unless we go in and we actually be diplomatic. That is the only solution. The alternative is Russia continues to push and push until they have Ukraine, which is just inevitably genocide. So if you don't go with diplomacy, the alternative is a spike and increase in human rights violations. So there is no net disadvantage to trying diplomacy first. But also you have to flow our Ray 22 card on our case, which talks about how Russia, that it solves in Russia. Diplomacy solves in Russia, and also our Dickinson 22 card, that Russia plans for genocide. So that is the alternative. The only way to solve is through diplomacy. Our contention 2, sanctions enhance authoritarianism. They basically just said sanctions can solve. That was really it. There was a little bit of an impact card there, but they didn't attack the card in our case, which is that in press 20, we do push regimes towards other regimes. That was the card about Russia buying millions of dollars worth of crude oil from Venezuela when we sanctioned Venezuela. They don't care about what's going to happen or if they're going to lose money. It's that they're relying on each other. So yes, sanctions increase authoritarianism, and when there's an increase in authoritarianism, that increases even more human rights abuses. Now onto their case, contention 1, arms sales. In Saudi Arabia, they talk about the Yemen war being fueled by U.S. arms sales, and we attacked it saying that the Saudi Arabia partnership will fill in, and so the war is just going to continue to happen. And then also that the less United States presence is in the Middle East, that's just going to lead to even more volatility in the region and less grasp and hegemony on our resources such as oil. And they stated that there's going to be a trade-off for arms, and that the arms that they're going to buy from other countries are just too costly. That just isn't true. Flow our Maduro model. Countries don't care about the cost. All they care about is the power. So it doesn't matter if it just costs more. They're going to buy the weapons because they want to abuse people and they want to stay in power. So that's going to continue regardless. So trade-off is already winning the arms sales argument. But also they talk about how Saudi Arabia doesn't proliferate nuclear weapons. That just isn't true. Our card talks about how Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries are looking to proliferate nuclear weapons, seeing as the United States is pulling itself out of the region, and Saudi Arabia in the middle of the Middle East is scared. They're scared, and it's extremely volatile. So they're going to continue to proliferate nuclear weapons to protect themselves. And when you proliferate nuclear weapons, that leads to a large amount of volatility, and that leads to even an increase in conflict and an increase in human rights abuses. So overall, judges, you're flowing not only the arms sales do nothing to stop human rights abuses. In fact, they only increase human rights abuses, but also that diplomacy is the only option to really stopping the problem in Ukraine and decreasing human rights abuses. Thank you.
We'll take prop.
Okay, that's time. I'm going to send out a doc. Okay. The order is going to be condensing stuff on con and then back to pro. Okay. Actually, there's not going to be a doc. My bad. I'm not reading any new evidence. Is everybody ready? Awesome. Beginning on first word. First on Russia, they cede in cross-examination that Russia's losing the war now. Their evidence is from like 3 weeks ago. This war is moving fast. Russia still hasn't taken a single city. They're not winning. Then you need to extend the 2 cards we give you, Hellmeyer 2021 and Hullen 19. They're both really important. Hullen 19 tells you that negotiations with the authoritarian regimes fail because they're bad actors. They're not successful. They're just asserting that diplomacy works. They haven't proven to. Russia's still in there, but it's not. But Russia's going to naturally leave on its own because it's not sustainable. The second thing is Hellmeyer 2021, which tells you that that negotiations with Russia legitimize Russia to its own people, shore up internal legitimacy for Russia, and increase internal authoritarian legitimacy. You make the problem worse with negotiations. They don't work. Diplomacy doesn't solve. On the second argument, or actually quick overview on poverty and all of this stuff in war. So first off, we want to argue war causes poverty. So all of their sanctions arguments about causing poverty are contingent on them like stopping war. We're going to win that we solve war overall more so than we do, outframing them in this debate. On the second argument about sanctions, we tell you that sanctions deter future aggression. Even if people are poor, it's more important to stop wars, stop like large scale conflicts. That's coming out of the Hanlon 19 card. That's really, really important. We're going to win the big picture framing. Go back over onto our side of the flow. Okay, so first on Saudi Arabia. They tell you that like these countries don't care about costs. Two responses. First off, if they don't have money, they can't buy the things. It doesn't matter what it costs if they literally don't have money because we're taking away their ability to like do this. But second off, we're telling you it takes a long time to switch systems because of interoperability. We give you 2 cards there, Guy 18, Spindle 19, both go unresponded to, which tells you even if these regimes want to do this stuff, they literally don't have the capacity to. We tell you you ground Saudi Arabia's Air Force in 2 weeks, forcing them to the negotiation table, forcing them to fix their policies. That's an impact you only get on our side of the flow, stopping a war that's killing 13 million people right now. That's huge. Also, they tell you that like there's going to be like proliferation or whatever. So first off, we tell you there's zero empirics for like this working. There's zero empirics for Saudi Arabia going to trying to get prolifs. That's from our Zakari card. But also we tell you that like sanctions. The reason why Saudi Arabia doesn't want to do this is because we're doing like arms embargo. There are other types of embargoes. It can always get worse. Saudi Arabia fears backlash not only from us but from other international actors. There's no chance of this happening whatsoever. Okay. That means we're cleanly winning Saudi Arabia. Now, the other really big place you're going to end up voting for us is Philippines. We don't get good engagement here. They just like say like, oh, like South China Sea, whatever, like Duterte doesn't care about human rights. Again, it's about giving Duterte the capacity. We give you tons of evidence. We tell you 3 ways that aid to the Philippines right now is propping up what Duterte's capabilities of doing human rights abuses are. First is giving funds to the police and military. Second is giving them their technology. And third is their surveillance mechanisms, which prop up all the other ones. You stop all that immediately when you vote for us. The other big thing is that they ignore 2 impacts. First, we tell you that there's a literal genocide going on right now in Philippines, which you stop on our side of the flow. And second, that it spills out to all of Asia and like contaminates all of Asia doing the similar practices, which is a really, really big conflict magnifier. There's zero risk of war with China. China is risk averse. That's coming from our Shinfrinsen 19 card in our Art 10 card, which tells you that there's no risk of things going bad with China. We're cleanly winning the Philippines scenario. This is the biggest impact that's happened so far in this debate. We have 100% strength of link. You should be voting off of it.
All right, Grand Cross. Here we go. Are y'all ready?
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay.
So you have one.
Yep. Okay, sweet. So what is your response to specifically just the South China Sea stuff?
So we read you 2 different cards. 1 second. Okay, so South China Sea is path dependent on China wanting to move forward in the South China Sea, wanting to be a hegemon. We gave you 2 different cards, Shinfrinsen 19, that's in the doc, and also Art 10. Basically, they tell you there's no chance at all of China doing this because of the guiding philosophy of the Chinese state. Okay. Both of those were dropped.
You gonna have a question?
On sanctions, sanctions increasing authoritarianism. What was the warrant and the press 2020 card? Actually, wait, no, never mind. Why do you think that Russia's going to continue the war right now, given what you could like? Given what
Right. So if he loses the war, he goes back home and he's kicked out of power, which means he's no longer.
Wait. But that doesn't make sense given that we tell you that your side shores up internal support for him.
No. So the thing is, either he loses the war and he goes home and he's out of power, or he.
Wait. Explain that. Why would he be out of power? He controls all the media, and you give him the excuse.
Because he lost the war. But look, if he goes back home through diplomacy and says that he came to an agreement with the Western powers.
What's to stop him from saying that regardless of what happens in the war? Because he controls all the media.
Russia is dependent, or at least Putin is dependent on his picture. That is his only reason
That's
he
what
is
he
in power.
controls his picture.
That's what I'm
because he
saying. His
controls
picture
all the
is the
media.
reason he's in power, and so if his picture is his reputation is ruined, his power is ruined.
You're not engaging with the fact
his power
that since he
is ruined.
you're not engaging with the fact that since he controls all the state media, he controls what the people think, regardless of what happens, and you give him an active excuse by doing the sanctions.
It's not about Russia. It's about
Do you
everyone.
have a question? Do you have a question? It's your turn for a question.
Okay, so you talk about renewable energy with Saudi Arabia. What country is going to give renewable energy, or does Saudi Arabia have the opportunity to create it itself?
Go ahead.
Right, yeah, our renewable energy stuff was in response to the idea that Iran's gonna come into the strait and use oil to bully people around and coerce it, which goes unresponsive to. I also had another argument that still, even if that happens, U.S. oil fills in, that was a response to the Iran DA.
Okay, okay, that's all.
Yeah, so how do you? So the only evidence you read about solvency in Russia was the stuff from the Middle East, right?
Wait, with what? Diplomacy?
About diplomacy, right? That was just only
With the Middle East and with Russia, both cards.
And there's also
what cards were those?
What?
What cards were those?
We had Ray 22. I don't know what you read for Middle East. I had read a card for it. But the Ray 22 card was for Russia. I had quoted it in mine, and the Dickinson 20. No, that was a different card actually.
No, wait. Where is the Ray 22 one in case? I don't see that under the first contention.
So no. Look at the content. The second doc, my speech.
There's only one card in there, and it's not Ray 22.
No, it saes negotiations are working. Ray 22, and then right under
You're
that.
looking at mine. I only have one card in there. It's a different one. It's called Missouri Valley something.
Mo Valley Pro.
Hold up, wait. You guys didn't send us this.
Yes, it was my speech.
Okay.
Anyway, is that 3 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, it's 3 minutes.
Okay. I don't know how much prep time we have, so we're just gonna go. So this will go framework, and then the 3 voters for today. So the framework for today's round is stopping the abuse. So this brings us to the 3 voters of today. Whoever can stop the abuse should win this round. So your 3 voters are: number 1, diplomacy, arms sales, and then the external impacts. So first on diplomacy, we've proven that we decrease human rights abuses. We have the Iran and Saudi Arabia card, which is Al-Fari 19, that through diplomacy, that both sides agree that's the only way to end the war, which effectively stops the abuse. And then also, even if we cannot stop wars, we create ceasefires which decrease human rights abuses. In Russia, we also have solvency there. They're going to get up and say that sanctions would have done it, but that's at the cost of extreme poverty, and poverty makes it more likely that human rights abuses can get away unharmed. They're also losing on time from here because they have to wait for sanctions to take effect. While through diplomacy, we create immediate reductions in human rights abuses. So we win on diplomacy. Moving on to arms sales. So they have arms sales. They say the only way to stop the arguments in Saudi Arabia, Philippines, and war everywhere is to stop arms sales. However, that arms sales doesn't stop because of Finland. 27,000 people continue to die. 50,000 people continue to be imprisoned by the Philippines president because he doesn't care about human rights abuses. And they said that their only argument here is that it would be costly to shift. Take our Applebaum 21 evidence, which says it doesn't matter how much it costs as long as the regime is still in power. That's all they care about. It doesn't matter how they abuse their people or how much it will cost. That's what they're going to do to stay in power. So we're winning arms sales there. This brings us to the third and final voter for today, which are the external impacts. So by isolating Saudi Arabia, you create nuclear proliferation. And they say that Saudi Arabia is going to fear backlash and they don't have the infrastructure. Russia and China, literally any other authoritarian regime will provide that infrastructure and take care of the backlash by the United States. They fulfill that. And then on Iran, they said that a renewable shift would happen. That's not true. And that U.S. oil, it would allow U.S. to drill more oil. This is bad for all sorts of reasons. I don't even have to go into that. drilling more oil is bad. And then moving on to the South China Sea, they said that the only argument here is that China just wouldn't do it. If China has the capability to become the new hegemon, they will take it because that's all they need is the South China Sea to do that. So on external impact, arms sales and diplomacy, we win all the way.
All right, is anyone not ready? Okay, it's gonna be AFNEG. That's the order. Cool. First vote off Saudi. They just really try to flow through ink here. Remember, we told you first off, no Saudi pro. Limit tells you historically Saudi does not want to face backlash, increased backlash from the international community. There's no pro lift. Second, we told you there's no fill-in. We gave you 3 cards. We told you, 1, there's no interoperability. Even if you wanted to put other people's weapons there, it takes years to do. Even it's too expensive, making it prohibitive, which means even if they try to tell you that the country wants to fill in, it tells you that they can't because they don't have enough money. But even third, we tell you that other countries won't even fill them in. It comes zang because they don't want to deal with the U.S. All that means is that Saudi doesn't have weapons. What does this matter? Because we told you that we ground the Royal Saudi Air Force in 2 weeks. That pushes them to the negotiation table. Why does this outweigh every other argument? 1, it outweighs on time frame. We solved this thing in 2 weeks. Second, 13 million lives outweighs the number of people in Ukraine. It outweighs all the other people impacted. And then third, specificity is straight to link. They haven't challenged us on Philippines. We said China doesn't want to go to war. They are risk averse. There's no chance of South China Sea war. Second, we told you that the Philippines, we fund them, we give them weapons that they increase their capacity to engage in human rights violations. They don't do that. Why is that important? Because remember, we tell you that other countries, if they are allowed to continue what they're doing without any checks, can take what the Philippines is doing, move on. We've answered their defenses outweighs on scope. Now, gone to Russia. Remember, we tell you that we can do diplomacy too because it's not about HR violations. It is a literal war going on. This resolution is not about the HR violations completely, it's about a war. But even still, they also told you that they don't solve because remember, we told you that Helen 19 tells you that authoritarian negotiations fail, which I didn't respond to. Second, we told you Hellmeyer 19 tells you that negotiations include domestic support, which makes it even worse. But Pelichuk 15 tells you that it makes Russia unlikely to want to do it bankrupts them, which is why any negotiations happen in the first place because they're bankrupt. Also, remember on sanctions, the Helen 19 tells you that sanctions deter future aggression. So how does this round break down? We can stop 13 million people from dying in the status in 2 weeks, but they're trying to tell you that maybe you solve Russia, maybe you solve other aggression. I think you have to vote here. So proud to vote AF.
Cool. All right, thank y'all. Judges, what do you want us to do here? Stay or?
I mean, yeah, I think what I've done in other rounds is like if y'all want to stick around for like a couple minutes or however long it takes to decide, and then we can disclose. I don't know how everyone else feels though.
I've done the same thing. So if y'all want to sort of stick around, then we'll be back when we finish filling out the ballot. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, great round. Well done. Really well done.